Hello world, my name is Shitij, this is the coding tree, and today we're talking about data types and variables. Data is a big deal in computer science. Companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook have huge, and I mean huge databases. To put it into perspective, the physical size of Google's database is 352,000 square feet. Comparatively, the physical size of the White House is just 55,000 square feet. Now, the actual databases that Google, Amazon, and Facebook use is beyond the scope of this course and frankly beyond me. But understanding the concepts behind those databases, even at the very minimum level, is a very crucial step into starting your computer science journey. That's why today we're taking a look at variables and data types and why they matter. Let's start with variables. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with what a variable is in math, but variables in math are nothing like variables in computer science. In computer science, you can think of variables as little boxes, with each box only being able to store one piece of data. So, let's say we have a box called num. In this box, we can store any value that we want. Let's just say we want to store the value of 3. So I can just put 3 inside of the box, or variable, and then forget about what num is equal to. Then, if I ever need to look at num again, I can just see inside of the box and see the 3. That's how variables get their power, because you can just assign a value to them and then forget about what the value is until you need it again. So now let's dive deeper as to why variables are actually so useful and powerful. Well, first, variables give us a way to write more concise code and organize it. Specifically, let's say we had a program that consistently uses the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Instead of just constantly repeating that number every single time I have to use it, I can just store it in a variable called num and then refer to it later by printing it out and just saying print num instead of print the entire number. Or if I want to use it in any sort of math, I can just say num times whatever instead of saying 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times whatever. In that sense, the variables give us a lot of power over how big our code is and how we can write more concise, more dynamic, and better code. But more than just that, variables are a way to get data that we may not know. We can take a look at this through these 2 lines of code. Now, all this program does is take input from the user and then directly print it back out. But the way it does it is a lot better than the way that you may think, because it is able to account for anything the user may say. So if the user says hi, the program will print back hi, and if the user says hello, the program will still print hello. And that's why variables are so powerful. So first, let's take a look at the very first line, which is just x is equal to input. Now, you don't really have to worry about what input is because it is just another function written by the developers of Python. So all that input function does is just take input from the user in the console. Now, what the program does is store that input into a variable called x. Thus, it is able to remember what that input is and then remember where it is located and then print it back out. So, the next line of code just prints out x, meaning that the input is stored in x and then printed back out using x. That's why variables are so powerful. The variable x is able to remember the input so that it can print it out. Thus, variables are just a really powerful tool for programmers to use. But with variables come variable types. Each variable is assigned an implicit type in Python based on what type of data it uses. Now, if you have a bit of programming experience in other languages, you'll know that those languages require you to specify the type of the variable at its birth. Python is different. In Python, any variable can hold any type of data. Python just implicitly remembers what the type of data is. Regardless, we have to know about variable types, because if you ever transition to other languages, or even in Python still, variable types have an extremely relevant role when it comes to larger data structures and just overall math and calculations. Now, the 4 main ones you have to know in Python are int, float, bool, and string. Starting with int. or integer. All this variable is any integer. It could be -7, it could be 1 million. In Python, there is no bounds to how big or how small the number can be. Although in other languages like C, the number can be too big. Next, we can talk about floats. A float is any number that can have decimal places afterwards. A float can be 1.126 or it can be 1.0. It doesn't matter. It just has to have a decimal place after the number. Next, bools or booleans. Now these are very simple data types, but they're different from the rest in that they can only have two possible values, either false or true. In other words, they can have either a 0 or a 1. Going back to binary, eh? Yep. So that's relevant in Python as well in the form of booleans, where they can either have zeros or ones, 0 being off, 0 being false, 1 being on, 1 being true. Booleans will get especially relevant next week when we talk about if statements. And finally, we have strings. Now, strings can be any string of characters or words. So when you put quotation marks around hello world in the last video, hello world was a string. Okay, now that you know data types, you're probably wondering, why do I actually need to know this? Well, as I mentioned before, knowing these data types is especially relevant in other languages aside from Python. So whenever we do switch over to a more complex, powerful, or just different language, we're going to be using data types and variable types very frequently. Thus, they become relevant as you become a better programmer. And second, variable types still have a significant impact on Python. To demonstrate this, we can use math. Let's say you had a program where you wanted to simply print a number divided by a number. Now, to divide in Python, all you have to do is use a /. So let's say I wanted to do 4 divided by 2. The syntax for that would just be 4/2, and that would give me 2. So I can make a program where I print 4 divided by 2. But let's throw variables into the mix. Let's say I have a variable called x, which is equal to 4, and a variable called y equal to 2. I can do print x divided by y, which gives me 2, right? Well, the output actually is 2.0. Why is that? I divided 4 divided by 2 to integers, and yet I got a float as a result. Well, that really comes down to the way division works in Python. Because division, even if your input variables are just 2 integers, division will always convert the answer to a float. Thus, we get 2.0 instead of 2. A workaround for this is integer division, where instead of using 1//, you use 2. So the syntax becomes this: 4 divided by 2, which eventually will give us, instead of 2.0, it'll only keep that number as an integer, and it will give us 2 instead of 2.0. Thus, the program does its job correctly and just gives us an integer for our division. It divides x by y and gives us the answer, which is 2 and not 2.0. As a final example, let's take a look at the dynamic code we wrote earlier and combine it with some mathematics. So let's create a variable called x and set it equal to input, like we did before, to keep and remember an input from the user. Next, we can do a print statement and then do print x times whatever, or divided by whatever. Let's say divided by 2. So then our program will take whatever input from the user, divide it, and then return the divided value. So thus, we have already written some dynamic code that performs the task of dividing the user's input. Boom! We're done with writing our first dynamic program. And that's all for today, folks. I hope you enjoyed and I hope you learned something. If you did, make sure to drop a like, as that helps me out a lot. And make sure to subscribe if you want to continue your computer science journey. If you want to go to the next video in order to do so, click here and go to that.